Singapore is rightly called one of the four Asian tigers. Back in the 1960s, the country made a leap to become one of the most developed economies not only in Asia but also in the world. Today, Singapore consistently ranks in the top 10 global rankings for macro indicators and standard of living. The most surprising thing is that this was achieved on a very small territory, as Singapore is the 20th smallest country in the world by area. Yes, you heard right, the entire area of Singapore is 733 square kilometers. For comparison, this is 3 times smaller than Tokyo and twice smaller than London. It is not surprising that land is Singapore's most valuable and expensive resource. How does Singapore deal with the lack of land, and why does this lead to conflicts with neighbors? Since the city started to emerge on swampy land 200 years ago, its area has increased by 27%. Although borders with other countries have not changed, 578 square kilometers turned into 733. It all started in 1819 when the British established control here and began draining mangrove swamps to obtain land suitable for development. Over 100 years, the relief had already changed significantly, but this was just the beginning. The first major land reclamation project was the construction of Kallang Airport from 1932 to 1936. They drained 1.4 square kilometers of land for it. At that time, it was called a bold engineering project built on the most mosquito-infested swamps in the world and an aviation marvel of the East. This process then took on a truly gigantic scale. In 1966, the East Coast, the Great Reclamation Project began. Over 30 years, more than 1,500 hectares of new land were to appear in just one area of the city. The project was divided into 7 phases, gradually adding land. As a result, the area that all tourists who visit Singapore know today, Marina Bay, was created. In Singapore, they took the simplest approach. They just took more land and sand and filled it in a new place. The shallow depth of the water allowed this. For the Great Reclamation of the East Coast Project, they took land by cutting down several nearby hills. This was not enough, so they had to dig deeper, and now there is a small Bedok reservoir in that place. The soil cut by excavators was moved on conveyor belts to the coast, where it was loaded onto barges and dumped into the sea in the area to be reclaimed. In the final stage, bulldozers and dump trucks leveled and compacted the newly created surface to its final level. The reclaimed land was used for building residential and commercial properties. This is understandable, as during the project, the population of the developing country doubled from 1.8 to 3.6 million people. In 1996, a highway was built to connect the districts with the rest of the city. The cherry on top for residents was 185 hectares of parkland and a picturesque 15-kilometer beach. Today, Marina Bay is essentially the new city center with its stunning view of the waterfront, skyscrapers, mega hotel, and resort casino. Not only the East Coast has undergone reclamation over the past 50 years. Near the now defunct Kallang Airport, there were still many swamps which were filled with land taken from other areas. On the west coast, the Clementi area developed, adding 89 hectares of new land. In the Johor Strait, separating Singapore from Malaysia, new areas also emerged. What appears on the map today as Jurong Island was a scatter of small islands until 1993. For $6 billion, they were turned into an industrial zone covering 2,000 hectares, where today over 100 oil, petrochemical, and specialized chemical companies are located. One of the busiest airports in the world, Changi, was also built on reclaimed land. The first phase began in 1975, and the airport expanded to its current size after another reclamation phase completed in 2006. Of course, every medal has 2 sides. Such active construction means the complete destruction of Singapore's coastal ecosystems. The country's coastal forests and mangrove swamps have completely disappeared, and coral reefs are being destroyed. Toxic chemicals present in most fillers have polluted much of Singapore's marine ecosystems. But ecology is far from the main problem of Singapore's reclamation. Relations with neighbors are much worse. Expanding territory into the sea means expanding territorial waters. In the case of Malaysia, countries might just run into each other. Recent diplomatic disputes have arisen over the expansion of the Johor Bahru port and the construction of the Forest City commercial development in Malaysia. The Malays are not the only ones to blame for conflicts. These are just responses to Singapore's aggressive development. Also, Singapore has faced a ban on sand exports from most of its nearest neighbors, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Therefore, the country has redirected purchases to China, Myanmar, and the Philippines, and is also developing cooperation with India. It should be understood that Indonesia lost more than 24 sand islands to excavation before the embargo. It is said that smuggling continues to this day, although Singapore officially claims that all supplies are completely legal. Singapore is actively seeking new solutions to expand and use its land more efficiently. Firstly, reclamation technology is changing. The country is massively transitioning to the Dutch method of polder reclamation. In this case, a dam is first built, then all the water is pumped out of the enclosed area, and the resulting pit can be filled with anything. Not just soil construction waste, and sufficiently reliable concrete will also work. Singapore is already reclaiming areas with water depths of 20 meters, and is ready to do this at even greater depths. Secondly, Singapore is implementing unique infrastructure projects aimed at saving the country's land while providing new opportunities. For example, in 2021, a floating solar power plant was launched on the twentieth Reservoir. Its area is equivalent to the size of 45 football fields, and it is one of the largest in the world. Another example is an 8-story fish farm with a capacity of up to 3,000 tons annually. Yes, the cost of producing fish in such a system is twice as high as with conventional methods, but in this case the saved land is much more valuable. Thirdly, the country rents or buys land in other countries to ensure its food supply. Over the past 10 years, Singapore has actively invested in China's agricultural industry. There may be many methods for solving the problem of land scarcity, but one thing is clear: Singapore is not going to stop. The goal for 2030 is to expand its territory by 30% of the original, which means developing another 2,000 hectares of land. At the same time, the underground direction for expansion is being worked out. While everything remains at the project and discussion stage, Singaporean authorities are considering the possibility of building underground industrial and commercial facilities, as well as laying roads and tunnels. The possibility of building structures on water is also being cautiously considered, more for tourism purposes than as real housing. The story with sand is not over either. As glaciers melt in Greenland, large deposits of sand are being exposed there, and if the transportation cost is acceptable, Singapore is ready to buy. After all, there is still plenty of sea to reclaim, and there are still desired square kilometers up to the border with Indonesia. That's all for now, friends. Please share the video if you want to support us, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell if you're new here. Goodbye.